Let me tell you about the exact moment my life split in two. It was a Tuesday morning, conference room on the fourth floor. The same conference room where I had sat through 11 years of quarterly reviews, budget meetings, hiring decisions, and every other ritual that comes with being deeply embedded in a family business. I knew that room the way you know the rooms of your childhood home. The way the light came in from the east-facing window in the morning. The way the air conditioning unit in the corner made a ticking sound every 17 minutes. The way the chair at the head of the table, my father's chair, was slightly higher than all the others because he had ordered a custom seat cushion in 2009 and never replaced it. I sat in that room on a Tuesday morning and I watched my father slide a manila folder across the table. He slid it to my brother, not to me, to Daniel. And my father said, and I remember the exact words because I have replayed them every single day since, he said, "It's time. The company is yours now. You've earned it." 11 years. I had given that company 11 years of my life. I had worked through a pregnancy. I had worked through a divorce. I had flown to meetings in cities I can't even remember now because there were so many of them. I had stayed silent when I saw things I should not have stayed silent about. I had protected this company and this family in ways that I am still not entirely free to discuss. And in the 30 seconds it took my father to slide a folder 4 feet across a table, all of it was simply rearranged, reclassified, made to mean something different than I had spent 11 years believing it meant. I did not cry in that conference room. I did not say a word. I picked up my coffee, I nodded, and I walked back to my office. And that afternoon, I opened a document I had started 8 months earlier and never sent. A document addressed to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. I finished it, and I sent it. This is that story. My father started the company in 1987 with $40,000, a rented office above a dry cleaning shop, and what he always described as an embarrassing amount of confidence for a man with no business degree and no safety net. By the time I joined, this was 2011. I was 28 years old, freshly finished with my MBA and genuinely excited in a way that feels almost painful to think about now. The company had grown into a mid-sized financial services firm managing a portfolio of real estate investment products. We had around 200 employees, offices in 3 cities, a client base of mostly high net worth individuals, and a small number of institutional investors who had come in early and stayed because the returns, for a long time, were good. My father is not a stupid man. I want to be clear about that from the beginning because this story is complicated and it will not serve anyone, least of all you watching this, if I flatten him into a cartoon. He is brilliant in the specific, intuitive way that first-generation entrepreneurs sometimes are. He could read a room, read a market, read a person with an accuracy that used to genuinely astonish me. He built something real from nothing. And he loved his children. I believe that. I still believe that, even now, but he also believed in his bones, in the way some men of his generation believe things that were never spoken aloud but were simply assumed to be true, that the company would one day belong to Daniel. Not because Daniel was more capable, not because Daniel had worked harder or shown better judgment or demonstrated any particular fitness for the role, but because Daniel was the son, and in my father's internal architecture, that still meant something. Something he could not entirely articulate but could not let go of either. I knew this. On some level I had always known it. And for 11 years I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was the work, that the work would speak for itself, that my father was a practical man above all else and practicality would win in the end. I was wrong about that, and the process of being wrong about it, slowly, year by year, and then all at once in a conference room on a Tuesday morning, is what led me to the SEC. I want to be careful here. Not because I am afraid of the truth. I have already told the truth to federal regulators, which is as committed to the truth as a person can get, but because some of what I am about to describe involves matters that have legal dimensions, and I have been advised to stay within certain boundaries. What I can tell you is this. I can tell you what I saw. I can tell you what I felt. And I can tell you the questions I started asking that no one around me wanted to answer. It started small. It always starts small. The first thing I noticed was a discrepancy in how certain investor returns were being communicated. We had a product, I will call it the Meridian Fund, that is not its real name, that had been underperforming for about 18 months. Not catastrophically, not in a way that would have alarmed anyone who glanced at the headline numbers. But when I looked closely at the quarterly reports going out to investors versus the internal performance data I had access to, there was a gap. A consistent gap, small enough to be explained away. Large enough, when you added it up over time, to matter. I raised it quietly, privately, in the way you raise things when you are trying to protect everyone in the room, including yourself. I went to my father's CFO, a man named Gerald who had been with the company since the 90s and who I had always respected, and I laid out what I was seeing and asked him to help me understand it. Gerald looked at the numbers. He looked at me, and he said, "These reports go through your father. Take it up with him if you want to, but think carefully about what you're doing before you walk into that office." That sentence stayed with me for months. Think carefully about what you're doing. It was a warning dressed as advice, and I understood it as such. And I went back to my desk, and I said nothing. That was the first time. By 2019, I had a folder on my personal laptop that I had not shown anyone. It was a record, dates, figures, documents, emails I had quietly forwarded to myself. I told myself I was keeping it for protection. I told myself I was not going to use it. I told myself that families found ways through these things and that it would resolve itself, and that I was not the kind of person who did what I was very clearly beginning to consider doing. And then came the Tuesday morning. And the folder across the table, and Daniel. People ask me, and they always ask this, whether the SEC filing was about revenge. I have thought about that question more carefully than almost any other question in my life. I have sat with it in therapy. I have sat with it at 3 in the morning in the particular silence that only exists when you are awake and the rest of the world is not. I have tried to answer it honestly, which means I have had to be willing to find an answer I did not like. Here is what I believe to be true. The filing was not only about revenge. But it would be dishonest to tell you that what happened in that conference room had nothing to do with the timing. Because here is the reality. I had that folder for over a year before I sent anything. I had the evidence. I had the documentation. I had, on some level, already made up my mind about what I had witnessed and what it meant. What I did not have, what I kept waiting for without fully admitting I was waiting for it, was the feeling that I had nothing left to lose inside that family system. That my place in it, whatever it had cost me to maintain, was gone regardless of what I did next. The morning my father gave the company to Daniel, I understood something I had been refusing to understand for 11 years. I understood that my silence had not been protecting a future. It had been protecting an illusion of a future. And illusions, once seen clearly, cannot be unseen. I went home that night. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time. I thought about my father. I thought about Daniel, who I genuinely do not believe understood the full scope of what he was inheriting, the good parts or the complicated ones. I thought about the investors. I thought about the people who had put real money and real trust into a product that had not always been represented to them with full accuracy. And I thought about myself, about the 11 years, and what they had cost me, and what I had told myself they were for. I opened the document. I read through everything I had written. I made 3 additions. I checked 2 figures. I attached the supporting documents, and I submitted it. I sat there for a moment after I hit send. I thought I would feel something dramatic, relief, or terror, or the particular vertigo of a decision that cannot be undone. What I actually felt was very quiet. Like the moment after a long storm when the rain has just stopped and the world is still dripping but the air is suddenly, unexpectedly still. I did not sleep that night, but I was not afraid, not yet. The SEC does not call you the next morning. That is not how it works. And if you are watching this because you are considering something similar, I want you to understand that clearly. The process is slow, deliberate, and largely invisible to the person who initiated it, at least in the early stages. You submit, you receive an acknowledgement, and then you wait. I waited for 6 weeks before I heard anything substantive. 6 weeks during which I continued to go to work, continued to sit in meetings, continued to have lunch with my brother on Thursdays the way we had done for years, because canceling would have signaled something and I was not ready for anything to be signaled yet. Those 6 weeks were among the strangest of my life. I was living into realities simultaneously. In one reality, I was a senior member of a family business, competent and present and engaged. In the other, I was a federal whistleblower waiting to find out what I had set in motion. The distance between those two identities, the effort required to hold them both without letting one bleed into the other, was something I was not prepared for. My therapist later told me I was describing a form of chronic hypervigilance. At the time, I just thought I was not sleeping enough. When the SEC contact finally came, it was initially through a secure portal, a request for additional documentation, specific and detailed, which told me that someone had read what I sent and taken it seriously. I retained an attorney that week. She had handled whistleblower cases before. She sat across from me in her office, reviewed what I had submitted, and said, with a calm that I found both reassuring and slightly terrifying, "You documented this well. You've given them something to work with." I want to talk about the attorney for a moment because I think this is something people do not discuss enough when they talk about whistleblowing in the abstract. Having legal representation is not optional. It is not a luxury. The SEC has a formal whistleblower program with specific legal protections against retaliation, provisions for financial awards in certain circumstances, confidentiality provisions, but those protections are not automatic and they are not self-enforcing. You need someone who understands the process, who can communicate with investigators on your behalf, who can make sure that what you have done is received and handled in a way that protects you as fully as possible. I will not walk you through every step of what followed because some of it remains legally sensitive and some of it is genuinely still ongoing. What I can tell you is that the process confirmed what I had suspected, that what I had witnessed inside that company was not simply a family business operating in the gray. There were real issues, real people who deserved better information than they had been given, and a real process now underway to address that. What the process did not address, what no regulatory body can address, is what happened to my family. My mother found out on a Friday evening in October. I do not know exactly how. I had not told her, and the investigation at that point was still confidential. But information moves inside families through channels that have nothing to do with logic or procedure. She called me. She was not crying. She was very, very quiet, which is worse. She said, "Tell me this isn't true." I told her it was true. I told her I was sorry. I told her I had not done it to hurt anyone and I believed it was still honest even as I said it. Even knowing that the distinction between intent and impact is not one that means very much to a mother trying to understand why her daughter has put her family in the path of a federal investigation. The call lasted 9 minutes. She has not called me since. That was 14 months ago. Daniel stopped speaking to me within the week. He did not call. He sent a text message, 3 sentences, the last of which was "I hope it was worth it," and that was the entirety of our communication since a decade of Thursday lunches. I have read that text message more times than I can count. I still do not know how to respond to it. I am not sure there is a response that would mean anything. My father, and this is the part that is hardest to say, my father sent a letter. An actual handwritten letter, which surprised me because he is not a man who writes letters. It arrived about 3 weeks after my mother's phone call. It was 2 pages long. I am not going to share what it said because some things are not mine to put into the world. But I will tell you this, it was not a cruel letter. It was not a letter full of rage or threats or the kind of language you might expect from a man who feels cornered. It was a sad letter, bewildered and sad, and somewhere inside it, not in so many words, but present in the way things are present when someone cannot quite bring themselves to say them directly. There was a version of my father trying to understand how he had raised a daughter who would do this. I have thought about that letter every day, because the answer to the question underneath it is complicated. He raised a daughter who understood that integrity is not just a value you display in the easy moments. He raised a daughter who paid attention and remembered what she saw and believed that the people who invest money in a product deserve to know what they are actually investing in. He raised a daughter who stayed silent for years out of loyalty to him and who eventually found a line she could not step over. He did all of that. He just did not expect that the daughter he raised would one day turn those values in his direction. There is a version of the whistleblower story that gets told in movies and magazines and award show speeches. In that version, there is a protagonist who sees wrongdoing, wrestles briefly with their conscience, makes a brave decision, and is ultimately vindicated professionally, publicly, personally. The system works, the truth comes out, the credits roll. That version is not false exactly, but it is radically incomplete. Here is what nobody tells you. Nobody tells you about the identity crisis. When you have spent a significant portion of your adult life as part of a particular institution, especially a family institution, and you then take an action that puts you outside that institution permanently, you lose not just the relationships, but the entire framework through which you understood yourself. I had been someone's daughter in a specific way, someone's colleague, someone's sister. I had been the person in that family who was serious and competent and capable and quietly keeping things together. All of that, the entire identity structure, collapsed at once. And rebuilding a sense of self after that kind of structural loss is slow and unglamorous work that no one is waiting around to applaud you for. Nobody tells you about the professional fallout. I had assumed that the legal protections around whistleblowing would insulate me professionally. To a degree, they do. Formal retaliation, being fired, being blacklisted in documented and provable ways, those things are legally actionable and the protections are real. What the protections cannot reach is a quieter kind of professional consequence. The conversations that don't happen, the introductions that don't get made. The industry is not large people talk, and when you become known as someone who reported their own family's company to federal regulators, there is a version of the industry that quietly files that information and acts on it in ways that are perfectly untraceable. I know that I would do it again. That is the clearest thing I can tell you, and I want to say it plainly before I say anything else. Not because the outcome has been worth it in any simple accounting. It has not. If you are measuring in family dinners and phone calls and the particular safety of belonging to a people who know your whole history. But because the alternative, continuing to know what I knew and do nothing, had already cost me something I could not afford to keep paying. It had cost me the ability to look at myself clearly. And without that, everything else is just performance. I know that loyalty is real and important and also not an unlimited resource. I was loyal to my family for 11 years in ways that required me to compromise things I should not have compromised. I do not regret the loyalty itself. Love requires some form of it, and family requires even more. But I understand now that loyalty which asks you to participate in harm to other people, even quiet, deniable, technically arguable harm, is loyalty that has exceeded its own legitimate boundaries. Knowing where that line is and being able to act on it when you reach it is one of the things I am proudest of in myself, even on the days when I am not proud of very much. I know that my father is a complicated man who made choices that were wrong and who also built something real and loved his children in the ways he was capable of loving them. Those things coexist. They do not cancel each other out. And holding that complexity, refusing to flatten him into a villain because the story is easier that way, is something I owe him, even now, even in the silence. I know that the investors mattered. This sounds obvious. It sounds like something you would not need to learn. But when you are inside a family system, the people outside that system, the clients, the investors, the strangers who trusted the company with their money, become abstract in a way that is deeply convenient if you are try. I am going to tell you where things stand right now. As honestly as I can, the investigation is ongoing. I cannot say more than that, and I would not say more than that even if I could. Because this is not a story I am telling for resolution. There is no resolution yet. It is a story I am telling because I spent a long time feeling like I was the only person who had ever been caught in exactly this kind of impossible position. And I do not believe that is true. And I think the world is slightly better when people tell the truth about hard things even when the hard thing is not finished yet. My mother has not called. I have written her 2 letters. I do not know if she has read them. My brother, and this surprised me, sent a message 3 months ago. Not a reconciliation, not forgiveness, just a message that said he had been thinking and that he wanted me to know he did not believe I had done what I did purely out of spite. It was 6 sentences long, and it was more than I had hoped for and less than I needed, and exactly the kind of thing that real life offers when you have stopped expecting movie endings. My father and I have not spoken. I do not know if we will. I hold that open, not as a certainty, but as a possibility, because closing it entirely would require me to believe the relationship is over, and I am not ready to believe that yet. Maybe that is hope. Maybe it is just the last form of loyalty I have left. What I want to leave you with is this. There is a version of integrity that is easy, the kind that costs you nothing because it was never tested. And then there is the kind that asks you to give up something you cannot get back in order to remain someone you can live with. I do not hold myself up as a hero. I held things in for too long. I was motivated by things that were not entirely pure. I have caused pain to people I love. None of that is simple, and none of it is something I am at peace with entirely. But I am still here. I am still someone who can look at what she did and understand why she did it and believe, on balance, that it was right. That is not nothing. After everything, the silence, the folder across the table, the letter from my father, the 14 months of a phone that does not ring on Sunday mornings the way it used to, that is not nothing at all. If you are sitting with something similar right now, something you know and are not sure what to do with, I am not going to tell you what to do. This is your life and your family and your calculation to make. What I will tell you is, the weight of it does not get lighter by itself. Silence is not neutral. And whatever you decide, you will have to live with the person who made that decision for a very long time. Make sure that person is someone you can respect. Thank you for watching.